or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along to Teachers Talk Radio on this Wednesday evening. Really appreciate you being with us again. We're live, of course, zooming out of, well, all around the place, really. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But got a really, really important and interesting discussion this evening, very topical. Before we get into it, I just want to say a massive shout out and appreciation to our sponsors and partners on the show this evening, Hachette Learning. Hachette Learning, if you haven't heard of them, they're a big publisher of educational resources, formerly John Catt, of course. They publish books and resources for teachers all around the world. And we also have with us AQA. So I'll talk a little bit more about AQA later on. But if you want people who work with experts, AQA are the ones to talk to. And yeah, I'll hear more later. Just first of all, before we get into anything, I've got two guests with me. I've got Manny Botway, and Gulchin Cecily. Guys, I'll let you introduce yourselves in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to give viewers and listeners a little bit of context on where this show is coming from and the sort of context with which we're going to chat in. So, as people will probably know, it's been a fairly tumultuous, I'm going to say few months, maybe few years in the UK, and we might even broaden that out to Europe. But certainly today we're talking really about the UK. A few months ago, we had the Unite the Kingdom March. We've had various other large-scale protests. We've had lots of things happening on social media. We've had the political landscape very much changing. We've currently got Reform UK leading in many of the polls that you see. The two major parties of Labour and the Conservatives are faltering, it seems, at the moment, and that's been that could be a cataclysmic change in the whole way in which the country works, and certainly it's a reflection maybe on what people are thinking and feeling, because obviously a key sort of policy line of Reform UK is about immigration, and it's about that side of things. So that's the context with which we speak, and it's a difficult context, and as I say, if people want to get involved in the conversation, you can leave a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can leave a comment, and of course, if we get time, we'll share that comment, or it might be a question, because as I said, we've got two fantastic experts here. One of the things that I noticed, even as a small microcosm of this, was a few days ago, Gary Neville, the former England footballer, posted a video where, and it was a typical example, if you like, of the divide, the great sort of division that we have. He posted a video in response to the attacks that happened over the weekend, where he said that angry middle-aged white men were causing division, sowing division. Others disagreed with him and said that his comments were an excuse away from the real issues of immigration and Islamic extremism. And that could be one small microcosm, the sort of volume and veracity of the comments sort of aimed around that Gary Neville video is a small microcosm of the sort of situation, if you like, the context we're in. So I wanted to ask you both first. First of all, of course, introduce yourself and your roles. But then I wanted to ask, how do you think everything I've just described is expressing itself in your contexts? So Manny, I don't know if you want to go first, just with a brief introduction for yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name's Manny Botway. I'm head teacher of Tivington School, which is an 11 to 18 comprehensive
in Cheshire. It's about 1,400 in size. I'm also immediate past president of ASCL, the Association for School and College Leaders, which represents roughly 25,000 school leaders across the nation.
Thank you. And Gulchin, quick intro for yourself.
Yeah, my name's Gulchin Cecily. I am co-CEO of the Spring Trust in the London Borough of Bromley, South East London. We serve communities, particularly in deprived areas. We have just under 2,000 pupils. It is all primary. And it's an interesting conversation to have with you because the communities that we serve, the majority of them, you know, the divide that you're describing, Tom, is very much what you see. It's visual. And I remember coming back from holiday. I spent the whole summer abroad in the country that I love, Cyprus, where my family originally come from, in my cocoon, in my safe haven place, and could see what was going on in the media. It always seems to happen in the summer holiday. And I was on the beach, and I remember a head teacher getting in touch, one even saying to me, really worried about our refugee families. They are petrified because there is a march going on and there's protests, and there going to be a big group outside the hotel. And he showed me messages between the families. Lovely that our head teachers bend over backwards and do, you know, go over and beyond, and that shows the dedication, commitment of our staff in education. But they really were frightened, and the families' text messages, you could see they were petrified and saying, "We're not going to get out." So, and then when I arrived for my first inset day in the community on 1st of September to do our inset with my co-CEO, it really hit me when I got off the A20. And, you know, you see things playing out in the media, and sometimes you think, is it hyped up? Is it really happening to that extent? And boy, did it hit me. Every single lamppost was covered in St. George's flags. Every single mini roundabout was painted in St. George's flags. Bus stops were vandalised and painted. Slogans of "Get them out." And within me, that evoked something, that stirred something within me back to my own childhood, because I was born and bred in South East London, in Bermondsey in Southwark. And it was the period of the 70s and 80s where the British National Party was quite significant. They were getting a following. I remember being a child, and it was near Millwall Football Stadium, so that has connotations as well, you know, as well. And it, you know, resonated with me, and it brought me back to those days where, as a child, going to school and seeing what was playing out. I loved school, and my primary school felt my safe haven, but I was worried about outside. Were we safe? Because I knew that I was, you know, there was always that question as, do I belong? I was born here. My mother was born here. My great grandfather fought in the Second World War for the Brits, and that's how the family came over. They were entitled to come over, and but as a child, I didn't feel that I fitted in, and so seeing that play out actually made me particularly quite sick. And you know, 40 years ago, we had the Swan Report. I don't know, Manny, if you remember the Swan Report that came out, you know, and it talked about diversity, multiculturalism, and you know what we had to do in education to tackle that. 30 years ago, my dissertation at university, because it's something I'm passionate about, was the rise of racism. Because of, you know, immigration being played out as, you know, it was a scapegoat of unemployment, etc. And I wrote a dissertation on it. So I feel like we talk about making progress in society. We talk about inclusion, which is a big buzzword at the moment with Ofsted as well. And yet my question is, have we really moved forward? Have we moved 2 steps forward and 5 steps back? Because for me, it feels like that. But I hang on with hope, because I feel like as educationalists, we have to have hope. We have to frame this in the right way possibly to address these issues, right from the very young children that we have under our remit, right from nursery children that come through the door. We can't control the families. We certainly can impact on what's going on in our schools.
When you say, Gulchin, about Well, you've dug into a heck of a lot there. Let's start with the St. George's flags, considering that's in the title of this this show, right? And again, I'll ask both of you this, but Gulchin, I'll start with you because you've just brought it up. There's a few caveats. There's two questions. Do you think that the St. George's flag is an offensive symbol? That's part one. Part two is, do you see issues with the current sort of trend to put the flag everywhere? You know, would you put the flag up in your schools, for example?
I don't think there's anything wrong with the flag. We would put the flags up in our schools. We have put the flags up in our school. We put the Union Jack up in our schools. The flag is not the issue. The issue is how it's being used and why it's being used. And yes, the rhetoric is about uniting this country. I don't see that playing out. I see it as divide. It's creating division. It's creating hate. And you know, we would use the flag if we had VE Day. We'd use the flag if it was the Olympics. We'd use the flag if England were playing. And we should hold the flag with pride. You know, we should have that pride, and we should, you know, people. It's okay to be patriotic. You go abroad and you see flags flying, and it's fine. You see flags flying, you know, outside hotels. You see flags as soon as you enter a country. In places, in my own country, you know, as soon as I enter, I see the flag flying. It doesn't stir up those issues because it's the how and the why it's being used. And for me, it conjures up the emotion of it's being used to call out immigrants, to divide, and to make people feel like they're subordinates and they don't belong. And you know, belonging is something I'm particularly passionate about, as I'm sure Manny, you are as well. And we talk a lot about pupils belonging and flourishing, and it doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're English or from a different nationality, or whether you're born here or not. We as educationists are all about building relationships with our children, with every single family, so they feel that they're heard and they've got a voice. So the flag is not an issue, but it's how it's being used that is the issue for me. You don't have to be painting bus stops, do you? You don't have to be vandalising.
Manny will bring you in on that. Any thoughts? Initial thoughts on anything, really?
Yeah, I mean, you know, agree that the flag is, you know, we are a school that flies the Union Jack regularly, and you know, to give a little bit of context, in and around our school, we haven't actually seen lots and lots of Union Jacks and flags, but you know, there are particular members of staff or students on their routes to school who will encounter that. So there is definitely pockets in and around. And for me as a school leader, a crucial thing for me is always to be able to provide a context through which we can talk to young people and talk to our community. And you know, I recently gave an assembly, it was a couple of weeks ago, and it was around this idea of symbolism and community and our school values and what we stand for as a community. And an important aspect was telling my own personal story, you know, and sort of saying, look, growing up in South London in the 1980s, National Front. I mean, as it happens, you know, I'm married to, you know, someone who grew up on a dairy farm in Lancashire, you know, whereas I grew up, you know, on a council estate in Croydon. So absolute opposite sort of ends of the country. But, you know, we are passionate Brits. This is our home. My story, my parents came here in the 1960s, settled in Croydon, and have contributed an enormous amount to the country. But in telling the personal story, and this is an important bit, we talk a lot in our school about this sense of being an A-star student and that being a really, really important thing. And that when you finally leave the school, either at 16 or 18, we want you to be an A-star person. Now, a really important aspect of that is a sense of empathy and understanding. And the provocation, I guess, you know, that we asked ourselves as a community is around, look, are our actions welcoming? Do they develop a sense of belonging? If there are people within our community who are questioning or feeling unsafe, you know, what do we do about it? And actually, one of the kind of really, it was really quite sad actually for me to kind of receive. I received a WhatsApp message from a parent, just by way of kind of full disclosure. My school is predominantly white, you know, so it's relatively speaking not kind of racially or culturally the most diverse. And I received a WhatsApp from a parent, a black family, and they were quite distressed. They were sort of saying, look, a couple of flags have appeared on our street. I don't quite know what that means. I'm overcompensating in my conversations. But they also raised some of the kind of challenges that they're facing on things like WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, where in their personal lives, they're now finding that people that they had conversations with and regarded as being close friends are expressing views that are kind of really challenging for them. And, you know, so for me, I think one of the things that I found really quite unnerving is that given that this is clearly a major issue of the day, I would have expected the government of the day to talk about this. And look, I get it. I understand it's politically charged, it's politically heated, and there's political cost. But for me, that is at the heart of leadership. And at this time, you know, we're in a country where there's a lot of heat. There's a lot of kind of, you know, lack of unity. And I think sometimes you can set the tone right from the top to sort of say, look, I get it. I hear that there are kind of dissenting voices. I understand, but actually we can't tear ourselves apart, you know, and what I would have expected is that kind of leadership from the top, because for me, when you're operating in a vacuum in a world where teenagers are on social media, they're on TikTok, they're on Snapchat, very, very uneasy to be able to kind of yourself within your own community set that tone. And so I would have expected that from the top.
Sure. When you say expected that, what exactly, and again, this is to both of you, but Manny, I'll start with you. What exactly would you have wanted? What would you have wanted them to say or do in the last few months or whatever that may be?
I think first and foremost is surfacing that that there's an issue. You know, so actually coming out and sort of saying that, look, you know, we are seeing this, but actually when we're talking to people, there's actually a really kind of there's heat and there's emotion, and acknowledging that there were people within the community who feel really uneasy, but there will be some for whom this whole thing, and look, this isn't a phrase that I use often, but there will be a phrase where they find this triggering because, you know,
sure.
I mean, I was talking to my wife about this, you know, last week, and I was sort of saying, look, you know, if I'm honest, as a person of colour, symbols and where you see them and when you see them, they, you know, I can remember growing up in the 1980s where I saw signs that said keep Britain white, or where we were told you can't go into certain areas, you have to stay away from certain areas. So for a lot of people, they were beginning to think, what's kind of happening there? And what you've also got to bear in mind is that this is not something that is happening in isolation. You know, when you talk to young people about their social media diet, you know, there is a lot of kind of evidence that youngsters are consuming some really extreme and worrying social media content. And so, you know, as a school leader, I'm deeply concerned about where this is going. And I felt it really important in my community to say, look, you know, we pride ourselves on being welcoming. We pride ourselves on being belonging. This is my story. You know, I've been at this school for 11 years. You know, I have children that go to school locally. You know what I've contributed to the community, you know, and I'm telling you that there's a sense of unease here. I think an important thing, and I'll pipe down in a second, is that in the run up to the assembly I gave a couple of weeks ago, I talked to a lot of youngsters just in the schoolyard. And one of the things, and this is why I think when you talk about these issues, you have to be ultra sensitive, is that, look, there will be some young people within my school for whom, you know, their parents are expressing views which I may disagree with or you may disagree with. And actually, they may disagree with, or their friends may disagree with. So there's an uncomfortableness there. And we have to be very, very careful, because what I don't want people to do is I don't want people to kind of start clashing with parents or to create a kind of a tricky dynamic there. But I do want people to kind of consider their actions and think about, is this the most empathetic and welcoming way to be behaving? But also getting a sense of trying to understand people and why they do what they do is a really, really important value. So if I've waffled a bit there, but that's
no, it's great.
It's just trying to unpick what's in my brain about this.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to what's going on in inverted commas, there'll be those which we've seen who, you know, who are involved in this sort of, I don't know how we're going to frame it, anti-immigration movement. I don't know how I would frame sort of the stuff that we're seeing, but there may be some within that group who would say, I mean, I've seen them say it, it's not about race. It's about the numbers of people in the country. It's about integration. It's about this and that and the other. And it's about people, I don't know, values. It's about, you know, they'd say it's about people aligning with the values of the country that they live in and all that sort of stuff. Do you, I mean, presumably in your schools, you're going to have parents and students who have maybe a range of these different views and opinions. What I'd like to work out in this conversation is, how do you navigate that? Should teachers be apolitical? And should schools be apolitical? Should they just present facts and be very careful on what they deem to be a fact and not go beyond that? Or, you know, if we talk about values-based education, you know, where does that fit in with that? Do you see what I'm getting at? The sort of thing of, I mean, we heard the Reform UK deputy leader, I think Lee Anderson, said teachers are brainwashing students and that schools are becoming indoctrination camps, right? To quote him. So what do you think about all it? You know, how do you approach your teachers and other leaders and say, well, this is how you deal with it? Talk about this, but don't talk about this? Or is it, you know, what do you do? That's what I want to get down to.
I think
I know that's difficult.
Yeah, I think at primary level we have always been political. When we've got elections, etc., we teach them about democracy. We sometimes stage, you know, mock sort of elections so that they can see how it works, etc. And we even have, you know, head boy, head girl, and councils, and you know, children vote. So we teach those values of democracy. In this case, I don't see it as being apolitical, because it's free speech versus harmful speech. And I think we absolutely want pupils to express their views and feel safe to do that. But schools are not neutral when it comes to prejudice. So I think at some point, you know, we have to draw a line at racism or stereotyping. And I think that is the role that we play, that we create safe spaces where children can have those. And we teach them to be critical. We teach them to be analytical. And we teach them to do that in a respectful, fair way, where we don't sort of impact on that sense of belonging. I think remembering that teachers are at the front line in the battle against that polarization. And one of the things that I wanted to say was, as Manny was talking, is going back to that point about the government haven't, shared their stance on this in the way perhaps that we wanted, and that there is an urgent need for policy level attention. I would say that for teachers, Manny it might be different for secondary, but certainly in our primary sector, I think it's they need support, because I think even amongst the head teachers, when I've asked the question of, we've come back from summer, this is what it looks like out there. You would have had children, 100%, a small minority maybe, that have gone on these marches. How are we going to address this? Do we address it? Do we certainly don't want to brush under the carpet, but at the same time, we don't want to scaremonger and make it worse. So it's finding that balance. But I feel like what we need is an investment in staff training and some guidance for leaders even. Never mind teachers. I mean, where are the curriculum resources and what tools are there out there to kind of navigate that digital content safely? Because we want children to be able to look at that misinformation, that if there's fake news out there, whatever it may be, even at primary level, we are looking at that and being able to assess that critically. But we need to empower teachers to be able to challenge that without fear of repercussions. I've been in some lessons in the past where we have something called Lifter, where it's a platform, an online platform where it does bring to the forefront global and social issues, and children have debates, and we do a lot of talking in our schools, and we Voice 21 schools, so we give them that framework to talk. And I have seen particularly younger teachers being faced with stereotypical judgments from children about certain communities and what you may see in their countries or their dress or how they may behave at home or their cultures, which is what you'd expect perhaps to hear from families. And I've seen how some teachers really struggle to address that. So for me, it's how we equipping teachers and giving them the resources so they can have these critical discussions and build that resilience against this division.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think there will be a lot of school leaders out there at the moment feeling exposed, and they're feeling like, look, in the absence of kind of strong guidance about how to approach the issue, if you stick your neck out and you say, look, I think we've got a problem here within our community, I think given the context of our community, I want to do X, Y, and Z, there will be some fear from some leaders that they will be characterized as being an activist, as being somebody who is kind of trying to bring politics into the school, when actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to unify a community. So I think the safety of being able to say, look, this has been mandated by government, this is what you are supposed to do, I think that kind of cuts out a lot of that, and it allows you to say, look, I'm doing this because we have to do this, we believe this to be right. I mean, I think in a secondary school context, what I would say is context is always really, really important when you have discussion and debate. And as youngsters get older, they have to understand that in different contexts, different styles of debate and argument and discussion are appropriate in one area as opposed to another. So if you're in the debating chamber at the Oxford Union, then you may say some things that I would say is bad form to say in the lunch hall. And actually kind of getting people to understand the context, all stakeholders, is actually quite important, because parking aside the particular debate here around symbols and flags, there are plenty of issues that we would expect to cover in a PSHE curriculum which are controversial, or which have elements of controversy there, and actually equipping school leaders, schools and teachers to be able to say, look, this is context A, this is appropriate, this is context B, this is appropriate, this is context C. That's part of growing up and getting older, linking that back to kind of symbols and flags, etc. For us, a big part of the learning point is around whether or not the actions, or whether or not your actions are being applied in a correct context, and whether or not, is your intention to make people feel unsafe? Because if it is, that's not good. If your intention is perhaps something else, might there be another way in which you might express that allows you to advocate for what you want to advocate for, but doesn't make people feel unsafe or not part of the community? Does that sort of make sense?
It does to me, yeah. I mean, on a personal level, as I said, my partner's family are obviously not British, and not white, and a lot of sort of their experiences in the 70s and 80s and sort of 90s is stuff that I can't really imagine or begin to understand. And I sort of understand what you're saying about what the intention behind certain things are, and sort of thinking about why people are doing things. The flip side of that, of course, is them saying it's just our national flag. We should be able to just walk past our national flag and not flinch, sort of thing, and it not be an issue. We saw this. I was going to ask you both actually your views on this. We saw earlier this year. I don't think it was this academic year. It may have been, when a girl come into a school wearing on a culture day and wore the Union Jack dress, which you'll remember, it was a big story across the media. And of course, the flip side of that was, well, she's sort of course, there were lots of people out there who said that the child was almost being used as a political football. There was those that said that. There were also the others who said that's irrelevant because whether she was or she wasn't, she's come in wearing this on a culture day. And by the reaction of sort of teachers to that, some of them informally, not they've not been directed. I think it was just comments that were made or whatever. That girl, we know what happened next. It was like a massive story that she was basically told to, I think, get changed or whatever and go home. Now, of course, you could apply that to Ukraine tops. You could apply that to, lots of other sort of tops, flags, national symbols, whatever. But I wondered, like, in that situation, let's not talk about that. Let's just say another situation. There'll be another one coming around the corner. We know it, right? So let's just say, right, you got a non-uniform day coming up, and a student comes in wearing a full Union Jack suit, right? Suited from top to bottom in the whole Union Jack suit with the tie and everything, right? What do you do? I'm just asking you guys, like, do you sort of, do you then have to go to staff and say, because, there's that accusation, isn't there? The profession, I've just read you one from Lee Anderson. It's not just him. There's lots of people who make that. They know the profession's left-leaning. So they then make that accusation of it's a brainwashing thing. It's indoctrination. So in that situation, given the current climate, what do you guys do as leaders? Do you do nothing? Just let it play out? Do you speak to the child? Because like you said, Manny, rightly, is in that situation, I guess, the moment you talk to the child, are you then exposing yourself? I think you used that word. It's quite a good word to use.
I think for me, when it, I can't comment on the individual case, and applied to, but what I would always say, and I think this is an important point when it comes to kind of just symbols in general, is I often think that planning is absolutely crucial, and because for me, I never want to be in a situation where I'm kind of, I'm potentially looking like I'm kind of targeting or picking on an individual child, because at the end of the day, what we are talking about is a young person or young people. And I think sometimes what can get lost in the debate is that we are talking about young people. And so, you know, I'm not in the business of trying to target individuals or, you know, or do any of that. I just think it's kind of counterproductive. You know, on the point of just non-uniform days in general, you know, I mean, it's not.
I picked that just as a touch paper, because I think there's no point in avoiding the issues. Like, there's no point in, like, let's talk about the issues, because that could be one that could easily come up.
I mean, we've had children coming their football kits. Would you turn them away? And that's an interesting one, because I had a colleague of mine that said, you know, what's going on? Sorry?
If it's Spurs, yeah.
Oh, okay. But, you know, if it's the England football kit, a colleague of mine said, you know, he loves his son wearing the England football kit. But he said, given where we are at the moment, he's, you know, it's made him question, should he be doing that? He doesn't want to make his son a target of, you know, putting him in a box of, you know, belonging to a certain political party. And it's sad that we have to have these conversations, really. I think, going back to your question, Tom, really, you know, it's an interesting one. As I'm with Manny on that. I think it's about the context. I think it's about if the individual child, maybe you'd weigh it up, wouldn't you? And you think, is it worth rocking the boat? Because this could be just one child out of 500 children that we've said culture day, or we said non-uniform day, and they've come in kitted in the union, you know, trousers or whatever it may be. I think you could end up. What we don't want to do is alienate that community. You know, we serve white British families, and what the last thing we want them to think is that they don't belong.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Angela's made a comment. We've had a number of comments. Thanks everyone for sort of engaging. Angela said, you can't have a culture day and then try and make out the British people don't have a culture. When we reduce culture to flags and symbols, we open ourselves up to this. Was a comment from her. I'm not going to comment on comments. I'll just go through some. Wayne has said, conscious bias. How do you manage expectations? He's also, this could be a relative of yours, Gulchin. Could be. Strong guide. Is it AC?
That's my daughter. Oh my goodness.
There you go. Your daughter's watching. See, it's a reach. Strong guidance is definitely needed to help us teachers address different perceptions that our pupils have on different cultures. Our classrooms are becoming more and more culturally diverse.
My daughter is just qualified as a teacher, by the way.
Congratulations. Or commiserations. No, I'm joking. Congratulations. Massive congratulations. I'm joking.
We have to have hope. We have to.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. Anyway, there's been loads of other comments. I can't read them all. But yeah, so go on, Manny. Were you going to add?
I think for me, one of the things that I've kind of has played on my mind more and more and more. As I said, I've been at the school for 11 years, and you know, I absolutely love my job and I love the school. But one of the things that I think has been really important, you know, kind of more recently, is to develop this sense of love of place, a love of Macclesfield, and a love of our particular part of Macclesfield, because in many respects, I think potentially that sense of localism can actually be more inclusive in a way that people kind of, you know, don't always appreciate. But I do think there is something around kind of this sense of, look, if I'm going to lay my cards on the table, look, there are clearly significant chunks of the population who don't feel that politics works for them, who don't think that the economy works for them. And this is not just a British phenomenon. This is something that we're seeing across, across Europe and across the world. So we're not alone. We're not alone in this. And, you know, I am passionate about this idea that people have feel a connection to the places that they live in, and that they don't feel that we're not selling people this dream that in order to be successful, you have to do really well at school and move away from the area, you know, move to London or move to a big city. And I do think we have to get real about, you know, kind of how we have talked to large kind of, sections of our population about what quote unquote success is. So sense of place is really, really important. The sense of localism is important, but rooted in that is that idea that everybody can belong, everybody can be welcome, and that's really important. And I think.
Do you think, and on that point, though, Manny, do you think there would, in answer to what you both said, would there ever be a context where it wouldn't be okay for that kid to come in wearing an England top or a Union Jack suit? Would there ever be a context like if they come in wearing a Ukraine, if they come in wearing like a Ukraine top, if they come in wearing a whatever top, would we have that same? Do you understand my point? Is like, I get it, like the political climate and everything, but do we then feed into that by making that any sort of issue? If that makes sense, do we feed it by seeing it?
It sounds as though I'm dodging the question, but I honestly think context is really, really important. And you have to take the time to try and understand why people are doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise you run the risk of making wild kind of judgments and conclusions about what could just be a kind of innocent act.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. The point I was just trying to make was more around if we do anything about that, does that then make the sort of by it becoming an issue? Are we then making it an issue? I don't know if anything I'm saying makes any sense.
No. I get where you're coming from. I would say, for me, I would make it an issue if it has to be addressed, because the child's come in and they're deliberately goading or winding other children or being offensive or themselves coming in with that political agenda. That's when I would tackle it. And that's when I would, ask the question and probably see it as inappropriate, not because the flag or anything, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, but it's the behaviours that I would challenge more than the actual clothing or the flag. Again, it comes back to the flag. The flag isn't offensive, is it? It's the behaviours and the intent behind it and how it's been used, to divide and perpetuate the hate amongst people. They can, the immigration issue. I completely understand how, why people feel strongly about these issues. And like Manny said, there's unemployment and jobs, etc. And that's a worldwide issue, that we've seen playing out at the moment. But it's when it's being used negatively that we need to call it out.
Yeah, no, I know, I completely agree, and that's where the guidance comes into it. Because
I was going to say, because one person's "this is being used negatively" is another person's "I'm not even batting an eyelid."
Yeah, because you want to be able to say, look, it's not for me to get in the ins and outs of, the weeds of various things and try and understand what's in your mind or make a judgment about the merits of the rights and wrongs. You want to be able to say, look, in this community, this is above the line and this is below the line. These are the rules that everybody has to follow, and if there's guidance on that and there's kind of agreed rules on that, then I just think it takes that kind of heat out of that situation. Because the problem for school leaders, on this particular case, is that they'll end up tying themselves in knots trying to make arguments. And when you start talking about kind of nationhood, racism and stuff, that is the most heated, or one of the most heated debates to get into. And one of the things that's very, very different for school leaders now in comparison to maybe 30, 40 years ago is the social media aspect of it, is the Facebook campaigns. I was talking to a local head teacher, and this is actually really incredibly sad, actually. Local head teacher who had taken a group of youngsters to a place of worship, And in the end, they had to come off social media and take their school off social media because of the amount of, abuse they were taking. And this is a school leader who just wants to introduce and expose, 6-7-year-olds to the diversity that is in the country. And, she's now off social media. The school is off social media, and that for me is just deeply sad. And I kind of think, irrespective of where you sit on the political spectrum, surely we have to kind of accept that type of behavior is unbelievably unacceptable. And my worry is that, and this is my worry, and this is why actually this evening having this kind of face-to-face long form discussion is really important, is that sometimes the nuance and the context is missed when you're just on Twitter and you're just on Instagram. So people just see a picture, they just see a clipped comment, and it's right, wrong, love, hate, as opposed to going, okay, I might not agree with what this person says, or I might not necessarily, or I do agree, but I understand why they think that, and I understand how it's going to feel if I express myself in a particular way. So maybe I'll just check myself every now and then, so that there's an emphasis on unity as opposed to division.
Guy, Gulchin, just before you come in, very momentarily, I want to mention our sponsors tonight. We've got Hachette Learning. This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Visit them at hachetteLearning.com. We've also got AQA. They know who the real experts are in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers, combining insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that genuinely makes a difference. And of course, they're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you probably already know them. As we head into the rest of this year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers, just head to their website or go into Google and just search AQA. We work with the experts. Sorry, Gulchin, what were you going to say? I'm sure
I almost forgot what I was going to say, but it's come back to it. I think following on from Manny's point, I think we've got we are aware that social media, TikTok, Instagram, X, all of that is what's feeding young people's mind at the moment, which is powerful stuff. The concentration span of young people in terms of reading content, they won't listen to news, and one could argue the media and news are not always objective anyway, but we won't go down that route. But they are being fed with short clips of things, as Manny said, short little videos, pictures, etc., and they are believing a lot of what they read. So I think, again, going back to what the government stance could be here in supporting teachers, I think teachers are uncomfortable often in addressing this. And what worries me is what you said earlier about what's one person's inappropriateness may not be another person's. You're absolutely right. And I can honestly tell, speaking to a range of heads, when I've said, talk to me about what you're doing, how are you going to do anything? Are you addressing, the outside context? And some have said, oh, I didn't think to do that. Do you think I ought to? Some have said, yep, hands on. I've faced this. I've had assemblies. I've talked about national pride. I've talked about the flag and what it means, and da-da-da. And I've had some that have gone brilliantly and done role plays and debates played out in front of the children because they're confident to do that. But it does take confidence. That is confident. Absolutely. I would have loved to have seen.
It's not a bad thing. It is confident.
No. What I heard about it was fascinating. One member of staff having one view and the other one challenging, and for children to see that, look how we interpret.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What's going on here? How are we kind of embracing cultures within our community, or maybe not? And that was powerful. And other members of staff listening to the practice that's going on around them and jumping, saying, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe I ought to do something like that as well. And I think we do need to have those conversations, because honestly, people are scared. Some people are scared to actually raise these issues. And perhaps a little bit of brush under the carpet and hope he goes away, if I'm honest.
But that's why I thought having, tonight, maybe we do more of these, because maybe not with us, it could be other people, whatever. But I think that if you sort of avoid issues, in my personal point of view, if you avoid issues, then they get brushed under the carpet, and then people have those conversations behind closed doors. And often when those conversations are had behind closed doors, it might only be 2, 3, 4 people having them. You've only got those opinions in that conversation. With social media now, you can then sort of amplify that by only hearing from the people you want to hear from, on whatever side of the political spectrum that is. One thing I did want to ask you, and this could be a quick fire one, is if a teacher publicly expressed strong political or anti-immigration views on social media, would that raise concerns for you or not?
Yeah, for me personally, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we in our staff code of conduct, and again, look, the really important thing to do is to make it clear, because as I said, we're in this kind of clip world where people just clip things and then say, for me, it's not about left, right. In terms of the staff code of conduct, it's a clarity around kind of saying, look, as public servants, we have a responsibility to kind of, uphold public trust and confidence. And so overtly expressing political views on either side runs counter to your job as a teacher.
Manny, this is where I want to play devil's advocate here, because on the right, they'd probably say, yeah, but schools let loads of teachers say or like or support lots of sort of left-wing causes or left-wing, sort of far left in inverted commas, politicians or causes, and don't bat an eyelid. But, when it comes to anything right of centre, it's suddenly sort of a conversation like that. Do you think there's any validity or credibility in that? Or do you think that's just talking into the wind?
I would say, look, I can't talk for, other kind of organisations and institutions because I don't know what goes on in their school. But I would point to, I would say, look, in this environment, it just simply is not true that there is a kind of, any sort of left-wing liberal agenda as opposed to anything else. We always host a general election hustings for first-time voters, and we have.
Oh, looks like Manny may have gone.
We lost him.
The full range of every time.
Oh,
hello.
Manny, I think your signal. Yeah, your signal just slightly dropped. Then try again.
Oh, sorry.
Try the last.
Yeah, we hold, whenever there's a general election, we hold the hustings at our school, and all of the candidates are present. We always have a kind of local election special as well, because that's an example of where the context is really important. We need to show our, youngsters and our first-time voters. And an important thing that we haven't kind of factored in is that with the lowering of the voting age, we have to tackle these issues kind of, front on. So I'm confident enough to kind of say, look, I disagree. But one of the things that I think is really important is that I reflected on this myself. I think there is a pressure. And I'm not necessarily saying there's an external pressure, but I certainly place pressure on myself as a leader of colour, where I was sort of thinking, I was maybe second guessing myself for a couple of weeks on the issue. Yeah. Because I was really kind of thinking, look, how do I play this? What do I say? And I think that burden is worth kind of reflecting on, because you are sort of thinking, okay, could I be viewed in this way? Could I be viewed in that way? And in the end, I just sort of thought, look, I've got to get out of my head, and I've got to think, look, as a person of colour in a leadership position, it is more important than ever that you are able to articulate and you're able to air thoughts and feelings around this issue in a way that's respectful. The second thing is that, in the end, I just sort of thought, look, you know, at the end of the day, I serve the community. I have children myself, mixed race children, and what sort of a man would I be if I was not in this particular environment leading? You know, this is a time when you actually have to kind of show yourself. But I get and understand, because I felt it myself, why some leaders will be thinking, you know, particularly if you're new, let's say you're new to post, you know, and it's a rocky period, and you're in an environment where there's lots of symbols being, you know, that is a very, very different position to somebody who's 11 years in the community, lives in the local community, and feels quite confident in their own head and their own voice. So it's not as kind of, you know, I appreciate the challenges that some leaders are facing on this issue.
Yeah, sorry, Gulchin, go on.
Yeah, I was just to answer your question. It was like, absolutely, yeah. Teachers should not promote their own political stance in the classroom, and in the primary sector. I can honestly say that I'm confident to say that they don't do that. It's part of the staff code of conduct. It's, you know, that professional code. What I would expect them to do, however, is to facilitate a balanced discussion. And like I said, it's to encourage critical thinking. I think we can use what's happened when such issues arise to show contrasting views and to help children reach their own conclusion, help children to analyze what's playing out there, to analyze the facts, different sides, what we're hearing, and actually have, if necessary, have debate about it.
One of the things, though, Gulchin, and obviously I still teach history, you know, in a school, and you know, even just the other day, talking about political parties in the past, and maybe sometimes in the past I would have sort of done a spectrum and tried to compare the parties of, you know, today, and, you know, I don't know, like Weimar Republic or something to a party now, and so on, and just try and give some ideas and make it relevant and all the rest of it. Now I'm scared to do that. I'm scared to say, you know, anything sort of, even, for example, I think, and this is my, again, not the views of Teacher Talk Radio, just Tom talking as a teacher, is that use of that phrase far right. Okay. Yeah. Or difference between that and right wing. Right. And you know, I could easily imagine a teacher in a class going, even in a slip of the tongue way, well, that party's far right, that party's far left. Particularly far right, that use of that term far right. But that's contested. That, you know, that'll be contested by those parties. Go, we're not far left. We're not, and on the right they'll go, we're not far right. We're just, so this sort of use of, almost like this easy use of language, you've got to be so careful. Yeah. In terms of anything that's contested.
Yeah, let me flip you on the other side then, Tom. Yeah. It's obviously you're a history teacher, so, you know, and you're secondary, so it's.
I try to, Gulchin, yeah.
Different conversation, different level. But if children or students did talk to you about, you know, use this language of far right, you know, far left, is that how would you deal with it then? Because if you're saying you're quite scared, fearful to use that language yourself, would you shut it down?
I wouldn't shut it down, but I'd probably lead more towards policy and go towards this is what the policies were. Right. I'd probably look at a definition of fascism, definition of communism, that, you know, some of the policies associated with both of those things. Rather than
is it the language of far right that you
the reason I gave that example was I've got no issue with the term far right. The issue for me is when we, as educators, feel sure of something, and some people are so sure of something, and they say, I think we discussed this earlier in the conversation, when we were talking about some people will say, that's a fact, that's a fact, right? Yeah. Someone else's fact might be someone else's contested point, right? Now, some things just are facts. The sky is blue, right? You know, some things, let's not get away from that. Some things just are facts, but there are other things which are, you know, can be contested. So if I'm going to sort of label a party or group far left or far right, I want to be really sure. I want to be sure. I mean, I would avoid that now in the current context. I'd avoid label. I'd say I might look at what these sides believe, but I don't think I'd mention current political parties or in that context. I don't know. I'm just literally putting ideas out here.
Yeah.
I'm talking like I'm planning a lesson or something, right? I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably need like 2 hours to think about it, but that's my initial thinking. But one thing's for sure is I would be. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm always, I sort of pride myself on being a professional, but nowadays I will be extra sort of vigilant and careful with my own planning, because there's tripwires everywhere. There's tripwires everywhere for teachers in the classroom now, coming from parents, coming from politicians, coming from the media, coming from even their own schools. Let's be honest. There's leaders out there who will sort of, if could sort of not back you up. If you're, and that's why we always say, you always hear the phrase, get a union or get professional representation, whatever it may be, from wherever. That's the point I'm making is, and is that a bad thing? Well, overall, my personal opinion, yes, it is. Yeah. Because we will drown out innovation. We'll drown out free speech. We'll drown out being able to have conversations without teachers going, I'm just going to avoid that. It's not worth it. It's not worth all those tripwires.
Yeah, should we be avoiding it? How can we encourage children to be critical and analytical if we're going to carry on avoiding it?
This is it. Personal view, I don't think we should avoid it. But what I'm saying
I hear you.
Yeah, but what I am saying is I understand why people do avoid it, or at least are ultra careful. Because even I'm sort of, I don't avoid stuff, but I'm very sort of careful in my planning stuff in terms of what I'm going to say.
I think that's where that kind of guidance and almost surfacing the kind of what can be messy at a leadership level, and by leadership I mean at a national level, is really important. Because look, I get the sense from a lot of parents that they do want their child to kind of, they want their child to kind of be able to learn about different perspectives and to engage in some of these kind of messy discussions, right?
Yeah.
What is being fed at times is quite an extreme view of how schools go about it. And I think what will be really helpful is, from the top sort of saying, look, schools are really important places where youngsters learn about different perspectives. And we want schools to be able to deliver that in a way that's respectful and sensitive. And as a parent, we expect you to buy into this, and we expect you to trust the professionals and trust school leaders that they have no intention of quote unquote brainwashing your child. They are just preparing your child for the future. And look, I don't know a leader in the land who wouldn't intervene if they genuinely thought that there was a member of staff who was quote unquote brainwashing. That's something that as a leader we take incredibly serious.
Indoctrination, yeah, absolutely.
But again, one of the things, again, just to play devil's advocate, Manny, just because I like doing this on these shows. Yeah. We've had people on Teachers Talk Radio who've said anti-racism, that American idea of anti-racism is indoctrinating. They said a lot of things. It's against free speech. It's against this. It's not what it says on the tin. Lots of things they've said. Whereas there's other people who've come on and gone, how can you possibly say that, right? How is that even, like, what are you talking about? And then we've got these other people over here who really strongly believe that it's not a positive thing, that it's not a good thing for various different reasons. So I'm throwing that one out there as something where someone might hear that and go, well, that's obvious. That's great. Yeah,
but my response often with these things is that, look, Twitter or X is not the world. And what we are sometimes in danger of doing is we're in danger of not having guidance and not having a policy because of a few very loud social media voices who then begin to kind of dictate the debate. Because actually, most parents, the overwhelming majority of parents, they just want their child to kind of be able to learn and develop and be exposed at a sensible and respectful pace, you know, with their peers. What's getting in the way of that sometimes is that some of these kind of heated voices who have their own kind of axe to grind begin to dominate that debate. But actually, when you get people in the room, when you get parents in the room, they're sort of, look, I understand that, you know, yet what you're talking about doesn't sound in any way like indoctrination. Crack on. So I think sometimes we've just got, we just need to be confident this is where government, and look, I'm not saying that this is easy for them, because there's a political cost. Sure. Because we know that there will be those loud voices on social media saying, you're this, you're that. That's genuine leadership. You know, sometimes you just have to say, look, sorry, I know you're a really loud voice on X, but actually we're doing this in the best interest. And we know that we have the support of a quiet majority.
Yeah, my experience today, actually, funny enough, this morning I had an email from one of my leaders. The head wasn't there, and she came to me and said, look, this is going on. I've got this email from a parent concerned about XYZ. And she said, to be honest, this is getting ridiculous now, because it's really sad. It's 5 weeks into this academic year, and I feel she felt that it's been negative in that all they've been dealing with is, you know, the backlash of the media, things that are going on that sort of, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, in one of my schools, the head reported that there's a group of parents that are getting together and petitioning to have their children withdrawn from RE lessons. They don't want them to sit assemblies with about particularly. They don't want their children going to places of worship. They don't want parents that dress up and, you know, coming in for Diwali and showing their costume. They don't want the sweets. They don't want their child exposed to that. And there's also something going on outside at the moment is about terrorist attacks. Obviously, what's happened recently, in that wanting to be specific and see the sort of the lockdown procedures that the school has. I mean, these are challenging conversations, and we can't brush them under the carpet, because they're our clients, and they're our community. We serve them, and they need to feel safe as well. So we have to bring them in, and we have to, as you said, man, we have to talk to them and have that dialogue with the parents, because they do matter. And it's fear, isn't it, from their perspective, because it's their perception, rightly or wrongly, but we can't dismiss their perception, because we value every family and every child that comes through the door. So it's where it's difficult, where you think, hang on, you've been a bit silly, because this is just not happening. We're not brainwashing, we're not indoctrinating, but you have to bring them on side and on board. Interestingly, once the conversations have happened and the head said, if you really want to push that, and withdraw them from RE, we need you to write into us. Not one single parent has actually written that request in, following on a conversation. So there's a lot of scaremongering out there, and I think tackle it hands on and talk to the parents, bring them in, show them what we're doing. And I think Black History Month is October, Black and everyone. I'm not keen, part of me feels like it's always tokenistic, because if you're going to embrace culture, diversity, etc., it should be part of the curriculum, it should be part of recruitment, it should be all the things we should be doing in organisations. But I think particularly this time of year, and particularly what we're going through, what we're seeing, I think we definitely need to do something. And I remember my children being young and running something in the school that I was leading as a deputy, and they were coming, my children went to the same school, and my children were embarrassed of their culture, because they went to a school which is predominantly white. And I remember my son at the time, he was 7 years old, and he's like, oh, just don't, you're cringing me out. Like, please don't bring in Turkish music in the classroom, please. and by the end of the month, he was doing his Turkish folk dancing in front of his classmates. And I thought, wow, this is what it's all about, isn't it? So there is hope. I know we're sort of probably coming to the end. And I remember saying to Tom, we're really going to talk for an hour, but it hasn't felt like an hour at all. there is hope. One thing to say is I was on a train this evening, coming home from Cheshire, and I went out the weekend with my Indian friend who said she was scared to get on a train Friday night. And that was sad. And I said, yeah, because I find London, like you, Manny, I was born and bred in London, multiculturalism, it feels like home. But then what she said sort of, I was like, yeah, actually, she was scared to be on a train on her own late at night. So we sort of traveled back together. But tonight when I was traveling back, it gave me a sense of hope because the train was busy. It was, like proper sort of end of the day, 5 o'clock onwards. And it was diverse, ages, ethnicities, and everybody, there was a real sense of embracing people. People were helping each other. Would you like to sit in this chair? Oh, take it. And, oh, yeah, I'll do that. Oh, people were moving back from my little case. And I stood there, I thought, it's given me like hope for humanity because I've been feeling a bit negative lately, and I've been feeling a bit fearful for me and my children and my loved ones. Thinking, where's the world going to? Like, why? Like, I started off the conversation with, have we regressed? Are we moving forward? But this evening it proved that there aren't people do care, and there is hope out there, and people were genuinely being kind to one another and respectful.
Yeah,
Guys, unfortunately, we've run out. Manny, I'm going to give you 30 seconds in a minute. We've run out of time. But Manny, if you have a final takeaway for people out of all of this.
Yeah, just to reiterate, Galton's message of hope, really. Honestly, when you spend a day in school, in any school in the country, more often than not, you're going to meet young people who are intelligent, smart, optimistic, who care. And we can sometimes be, the danger is that sometimes we kind of, paint people with the same brush, but actually out there, there's hope for us, and let's hang on to that.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you ever so much for your time. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. Of course, this is available as podcast as well. Massive shout out to Hachette and AQA for supporting the show this evening. And we'll be back again tomorrow with more shows. So thank you, Manny and Gulchin. You take care, and we'll be back soon. Cheers, everyone. Take care out there, and happy teaching. And stay strong, and let's keep hopeful. See you later. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.